My name is Tak Ishikawa, Executive Vice President of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Today, I have the honor of welcoming 4 guests who come from different industries, backgrounds, and of course, 3 nationalities. One common thread we have is that all of us are firmly engaged in figuring out how the IRA is going to affect America, but also how it is going to change carbon neutrality and advance the cause for the world. I'd like to introduce Dr. Ken Medlock. Ken is the Senior Director of the Center for Energy Studies at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Next, I'd like to introduce Cleo Crespi. She is the Senior Managing Director of Guggenheim Securities in charge of the global sustainable business. Next, we have Matt Crocker, who is Senior Vice President of ExxonMobil Low Carbon Solutions. Next, I'm going to go to Anna Wishart. Anna is the Senator of the great state of Nebraska, a legislature, also Director of External Affairs for Monolith Materials. We have the world's largest oil and gas company on one hand. We have an innovative startup that is one of its kind. Then we have academia here, who is a Texan by heart, who's going to be able to talk anything about energy we want to know. And we have Cleo, who has financed up to, what, 150 billion already in your career?
I think this panel shows this energy transition touches a very broad cross-section.
It does.
And it needs all the different solutions and a lot of contributions and collaboration. So I think this is an exciting time to be working on this, no matter where you are, which company you represent. I think the Inflation Reduction Act, that sets the table, that provides that sort of durable policy. And then there's a lot around innovation, technology. We need solutions. We need to bring things at scale. And I think the US is well primed to be a leader in that. And we're already starting to see that come to bear.
Ken, when you learned last July, when Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer said we have a deal done on the IRA, were you stunned?
Not really. I mean, anybody who tracks how policy is ultimately made knows that it is a long, arduous process with a lot of capital expended on both sides of the aisle to get things into whatever ultimately is agreed upon into the final legislation. So when you look at the IRA, I mean, the first thing you have to realize is it was itself actually a compromise, because the Build Back Better Act was 1.7 trillion. Just over a third of it was for low carbon, energy solutions. This was much more focused, very climate focused, very focused on, subsidizing. So not really any sticks except for methane, with the methane fee that's part of the IRA. But a lot of carrots, right? A lot of incentives to really propel investment and promote development. And ultimately, that was able to get through largely because there was another compromise that was reached. They pulled the permitting reform language out of the bill. That is an issue that still needs to be addressed. But Manchin agreed because Biden came in and said he would support reform. He had general agreement from Schumer that there would be support. But then as soon as the IRA was passed, that support dwindled very quickly. And so we're now in this kind of no man's land where we're trying to figure out what are we going to do about permitting. And this is the big unknown with regard to how successful will we be. Because if you're subsidizing things but you can't permit infrastructure, it doesn't matter. So that is an area that I think we will see movement on this year. Thankfully, but it's going to be crafted very carefully, because the last thing you want to do, and say this in full disclosure, you don't want to completely strip things like NEPA, because they do serve a purpose, right? So there is a balancing act to walk there.
Cleo, from a banker's standpoint, when you read the text of the IRA, it had direct pay, it had transferability. Never ever seen in any of the ITC or PTC products that America had introduced in the past. This kind of really created a financial instrument backed by the US government. What was the excitement and buzz on Wall Street about this?
I think there were a lot of excitement around actually getting clarity on what the IRA and what actually survived from the Build Back Better. But what was transformational for the financial markets with the IRA is really two things. If you look at the IRA dollars, they're very much linked to the tax credit, which are uncapped in a certain sense. And the two things that they provide, this tax credit, is line of sight to revenue, and the second thing is underwritable revenue. And both are, frankly, equally as important. So the line of sight to revenue was really where we had a stumbling block for many emerging new clean technologies. There were promising, there were interest, there was development, but there really wasn't a line of sight to a commercial model. And that is transformational. The second item is really underwritable revenue. So if you look at the 45Q, VEZ, all the goodies that are in the IRA, you effectively have, in many instances, 12 years of fixed price. And I can't stress that enough in terms of being able to underwrite that revenue line. And what we saw applied in the IRA was really that fixed price notion. And it's absolutely critical to bring infrastructure projects about.
Because it provides predictability.
It provides predictability, it provides the capital both on the equity side and the debt side, but more importantly on the equity side, the true risk capital. It, at least on the infrastructure side, provides them with a framework and a first stage that they can go in and underwrite. So it gets that infrastructure built. Yes, permitting issues are still in front of us and clarity is needed there, but as far as revenue line, it's very important.
Anna, tell me, what are some of the challenges that you feel going forward in expanding your businesses?
I think the IRA did a lot. But one of the areas that we as a new emerging startup is some of the supportive infrastructure necessary to show our full clean story is very hard as a small company to get that built. A lot of times it requires, because a utility looks at us and says, you're too new. You don't have a history in terms of your technology or your creditworthiness, that we're going to make you put a significant amount of upfront money to securitize this wind development or solar development. And so that's working capital for an emerging company that goes and is set aside and is sitting there for years while we are working to improve and finalize everything and expand. And so, one of the things that we hope will happen more, and I think we're going to see this with the hydrogen hubs as well, is that some of the larger companies that have been around for longer look at potentially partnering and working with some of these smaller startups to build some of that connective infrastructure that's needed to really show the full picture of decarbonization.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. I think we often talk about the sort of the units or the final end product, but the infrastructure is a huge challenge and undertaking. But I think right now we're at this sort of intersection of a huge amount of innovation and technical scale up needed, no matter where you are in the energy transition and which part you're trying to solve. Because it's all going to be about getting the scale and then getting the cost down to the consumers, to the customers at the end of the day. And I think we're still at the start of that journey. And so, for a company like ExxonMobil, we're very much focused on the technical innovation and driving solutions that bring lower cost to the customers we're working with. And then coupled with that, the infrastructure build out to be able to supply the services and the products to the consumer base.
One of the features of the IRA for companies that don't have the taxable liabilities to offset, or nonprofits, or public pension plans, or even sovereign wealth funds, or foreign companies like us who don't have a large US taxable base, it really opens a door for people that can provide risk capital into the US projects. This is really a remarkable thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think there was a true recognition from really the lawmakers on the IRA and the direct pay feature needed. And that was because they saw that the tax equity market was just not deep enough. We're looking at about 20 billion of volumes annually. It's by a few commercial banks. So it really wasn't deep enough in terms of functioning and liquidity there. It's also a market that is more familiar with wind and solar. And so the other carbon management disruptive technologies, less familiar with those. So you're looking at different features, both on the direct pay and then on the ability to transfer once, that allows for innovative products, that allows for innovative financing structures that will provide more market depth, and we're working on a number of those.
It created a bankable and tradable instrument, which is incredibly important because I know a lot of the work that we do that's focused on what will drive success, you actually need depth and liquidity. And this is a vehicle to help promote that. There's a lot more work to be done, but absent depth and liquidity, you will only get what you subsidize and nothing more.
Yep.
So that element is actually incredibly important.
They had that in mind. You can really see how they were trying to attract private capital and really get that growth engine behind how it was built. And then we hear a lot, how long, once the carrots are given, how long
it'll continue.
Will they continue?
Yes.
So there's a bit of uncertainty, but I'd say for the next decade, this did bring tremendous clarity that is needed for building, functioning markets from the financing side.
Can you just talk about that? I'm sure if there are multiple products that are spawning off of the IRA, there's a lot more incentive for the government to keep on running the IRA beyond its first 12 years, right?
Yeah, there's a saying, once you give a subsidy, it's very difficult to take it back, right? Because you have a lot of vested interests that are really building entire platforms around that subsidy being available. I think what's interesting about the IRA, you've seen this play out multiple times with the production tax credits with wind, for example. They were set to expire about a decade ago. The industry didn't know whether it was going to survive because the importance of that production tax credit was, it was vital for development of more wind capacity. And it expired, but very quickly when you saw the reduction in investment in new capacity, the argument that the industry made in support of expanding those tax credits and extending those tax credits, it won. And so policymakers extended those things, and they've been extended multiple times, and now yet again with the IRA. It really shows you that if there is a specific goal that various policymakers have with regard to, it doesn't have to be energy, it could be anything, and the subsidy is viewed as vital for achieving that goal. The longer the subsidy's in place, the more vested interest builds in the subsidy being available. And so you end up building entire business models and entire commercial platforms around that. So the critical thing about the IRA when we get 12 years out, right, is whether or not you've actually fostered enough depth and liquidity so that you can effectively de-risk entry. And ultimately, I think when we get out 12 years, if we see fully liquid, deep markets developing in hydrogen and in carbon and you name it, right? You'll actually see more interest by small players to enter that market because they won't be debt constrained, right? That's a really critical point. So having a market that is liquid and deep actually removes barriers for capital that banks would not otherwise provide.
Tuck, I wanted to add
Please.
one extra element to Ken, what you're discussing, and that is that the IRA made the U.S. the most business-friendly ecosystem for growing clean hydrogen, for example, in the world. And so what we're seeing now is other countries that are figuring out what are they going to do to incentivize investment in this sort of clean tech industrial revolution that's happening in the world.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to bring that up. We focus on the IRA, but the DOE, coupled with the IRA, has this unique program, the loan program, which really provides capital for yet unproven but innovative technologies that a commercial bank cannot yet take. So coupled with the IRA, where it provides equity incentives, the US government is also providing debt capital to finance these innovative technologies. And Monolith, I think, is a beneficiary of that. Can you kind of expand on how that's really helping new companies like yours?
Yes, so Monolith is about to launch our $1 billion expansion in Nebraska. And part of the funding, a significant part of the funding that will go to that is a loan through the Department of Energy. So we're in a conditional commitment period right now and are very excited for that synergy. And to add to this, the hydrogen hub investments, as well as the DOE LPO investments, all of that together with the IRA truly is making the U.S. kind of unstoppable when it comes to building out clean technology. This is really legacy type of work that's going on in the United States when it comes to policy. This is the type of legacy that we're leaving not only for our children, but for our grandchildren in terms of a whole new industry, some that we haven't even dreamed up yet.
Matt, Exxon is all over the globe. But compared to what you see in America with DOE help, IRA help, and of course the hydrogen hub help, comparing that to your other global operations, where does America stand in terms of attractiveness?
I think Anna's absolutely right. Right now, the IRA has really propelled the US to be in the #1 position in terms of having that sort of very favorable, technology neutral, attracting investment. I think another country where there's substantial policy is Canada. It's different to the IRA, but it's got some very attractive facets. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we've announced our first grassroots biofuels investment, which is in Canada, really supported by, again, the favorable policy and the durable policy there. I think what we're seeing is other countries and jurisdictions are really responding to we call it, I guess, the carrots in the IRA, to realize, what adjustments they need to make, what are they going to need to do in order to ensure that investment gets attracted into those locations. I'm particularly talking about Europe, which I think is obviously taking great note of the Inflation Reduction Act and steps they need to do. So, I mean, it's a patchwork around the globe. It's more nascent, I would say, out in Asia Pacific. But countries are developing their positions fast. But if right now today, the Inflation Reduction Act would be the #1 policy framework. And I think collectively across the group here, it's technology neutral, it's durable, it's attracting investment, it's bringing that technical innovation, which is what we need to address the energy transition.
What we found very interesting on the corporate side and our clients, especially those with a global footprint, like obviously both of your companies here, there's a healthy level of still competition and positioning on low carbon, but there's a realization that actually joint ventures are critical. Actually, these business models, as they emerge, really to de-risk and make it more palatable. There's a full value chain integration approach. And there are different skill sets that different players obviously bring. So a lot of international players are looking at how can we be helpful in value add in the US, and they're partnering with US entities as well. And there's a motivation there as well to be able to claim the tax credit. There are lots of other ramifications. But we're really seeing that era of co-opetition happening in the US and also getting exported, because those parties are also thinking, okay, we've advanced what we can do in the US, what else can be done? And so we're seeing, those beginnings of decision making, those think process really maturing elsewhere, not only in the US via those strategic partnerships.
Clean hydrogen. Matt, Exxon produces a lot of hydrogen today, but you're changing your business model to use cleaner hydrogen for your petrochemical business, right? That's a big undertaking. Can you kind of tell me? And is that also being helped by the IRA?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, most people don't realize if we looked at sort of global producers of hydrogen, ExxonMobil will be in the top 10 of hydrogen producers. Most of that today, all that today is used for our internal processing within our refinery and chemical plants. And so right now today, we have the largest low carbon hydrogen project that's been announced under development. And what we're doing there is actually removing the carbon dioxide at the point of making the hydrogen. And then half of that hydrogen we're going to use to decarbonize our own operations. Within Baytown, we have a very large refinery and chemical complex there. And then the other half we'll be using to support third-party customers through their needs to go from regular hydrogen to the low-carbon hydrogen. And again, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there are supportive measures like there are for CO2 sequestration, so the 45Q. The 45V is the sort of the sister companion there in terms of providing incentives for decarbonizing hydrogen. And it's what's great is it's technology neutral, so it supports multiple different pathways, as Anna talked about, as well as, say, green pathways and the pathway that we're choosing at ExxonMobil.
Well, Ken, when is this hydrogen economy really going to take off?
Well, I think there are two principal elements that we'll see come together that will determine how that unfolds. First is the Hydrogen Hubs initiative that's part of the IIJA. $8 billion that will be allocated to create multiple hubs around the country. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstration is administering those. And then the IRA is just sort of the kicker. It's really about who's going to regulate the infrastructure? What does interstate commerce look like versus within state commerce? These are some blind spots, if you will, that the US government still has to address. And there's a lot of active discussions on this, but the quicker we address those issues, the better, because without a doubt, you will see hydrogen hub development in the Gulf Coast, Louisiana and Texas, on the West Coast and in California. Those are probably the two most prominent places in terms of scale because of their existing industrial footprint and because, quite frankly, what the ports are doing. So the ports are very proactive in trying to promote low carbon energy development within their footprints because it has direct implications for their own sustainability metrics. So hydrogen is a really important part of this. So as ports push on this, and ports are great canaries in the coal mine, if you will, because anything that happens in the industrial space, if it happens at a port first, it's get ready, because 5 to 10 years from now, you're going to see it more broadly sort of exported. And because of that point, it's likely that you'll see clean hydrogen move into existing applications first. Because you've got a legacy, you've got a backbone, you'll just transform that first and then start to build out from there, because once that backbone is established, it provides a platform to think about heavy transport and maritime applications and even power generation. So lots of things on the table.
If the political landscape were to change, is there a risk of something happening to the IRA?
No. There will be noise, but it's legislation. That's the beauty of getting these types of things passed through the legislative process, because undoing legislation requires additional legislation. And there's already been a lot of political capital expended, so talk about a mountain to climb, that's a huge one. So it's highly unlikely you'll see anything undone.
I think this also speaks to the importance, Tak, of getting the guidelines out, making sure they're practical and pragmatic, so that development can start to occur and Americans across the country can start to see the benefit.
A lot of corporates are front-running that. We're advancing with our clients on many agreements that have, specific language towards, depending on what clarification comes from the IRS, terms will, be revisited or split, or depending on what the mechanism is. But corporates are really leaning in. I think that we see a lot of momentum. We see a lot of decision-making on the back end of they're not waiting for further guidance. We're seeing that environment really nourish and flourish pretty aggressively.
What will the financial market require of a technology provider to provide in terms of performance guarantee? Because although the government has said they will give $85 per ton of CO2 sequestered, right? And you said it provides predictability, but that predictability only applies if the plant actually captures a ton of CO2 as planned. Do you need kind of a balance sheet backed performance guarantor to stand behind that technology, or is the financial market prepared to take on that risk?
There's still a lot of risk on the table. So that's why I say a lot of the projects today that we're seeing in the low carbon environment are not project finance ready in the traditional sense of the term.
Yes.
And to the other side of the spectrum, I'd say a lot of these businesses, it doesn't apply to all, but a lot of these businesses are not public market ready in the terms of common equity investments. And we've seen the dangers of that when the SPAC market was extremely hot, of effectively becoming public too soon. So right now we're looking at a pocket of capital that is very much structured equity, That is the capital that is advancing these low carbon projects. That is the capital that is leaning in, I would say, on some of your points on the technology risk and the de-risking. And we are seeing a bit of give and take between how much risk the corporates are willing to assume and how much risk they're willing to put on balance sheet, as well as how much risk the capital providers. So I do think between the corporates really wanting to advance on their low carbon ambitions and the capital that has been raised is pretty massive. If you look at just sustainability infrastructure as an asset class, they're sitting on about 150 billion of dry powder right now. And they are really seeking solutions to deploy that capital. I do think that will narrow the bid-ask spread, and there'll be some risk-taking on both sides of the equation there.
So on carbon capture, people like Matt and us, where we do have a balance sheet, we can finance our own projects and lead the world that this technology is really workable and safe. And it can really help decarbonize. That's a role that big companies like us need to play, right? That's kind of my conviction. What do you say to that, Matt?
Absolutely, and I think we are, right? I mean, it's to do just that. It's to bring solutions at scale that we can deploy between the two companies, leveraging the strengths that we have, both financial and with technical capabilities as well. So you're absolutely right.
And that should lead the way for other people that had some skepticism about technology to kind of really jump in.
Absolutely, and I think Jigar Shah at the DOE acknowledges that. He said, quote unquote, they've done their part. Now corporates need to come in and take on some of that risk as well. He said that multiple times, and frankly, that was what will get us to truly progress at the end of the day on our common ambitions.
Closing remarks?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking about federal policy and the role of finance. We can't underestimate the importance of state and local policy. And there are a lot of things in discussion in the legislative process in different states around the country right now that could be a real boon to help accelerate the impact of the IRA. Some of them address things that people don't often think about that are related to liability, for example, or project finance, because there might be funds available through different types of state loan programs that can be applied. These are kickers, these are adders. These are things that once they're addressed will kind of lay a much clearer path for developing the infrastructure that needs to be developed that'll be supported by the IRA, the IIJA. Because again, when you talk about infrastructure, the conversation gets very local very fast. And we sometimes forget that when we just stay at a high level and focus on federal policy. So that's an area to watch, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes to pass over the course of the next few months.
This energy transition is a long haul, and it can't be done just by one party. I think collaboration between all parties and communicating is really key. I really had fun today. I really did. And thank you so much for joining us in this panel.